So welcome. Thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties. Let's start with a blessing here. Baruch atah Adonai asher Amen. So as we're dealing with these technical changes, another change that is going to impact all of us is that starting this coming week, Zoom is requiring, for security reasons, that every Zoom meeting have either a
I'll send it to you.
word or a waiting room. So if you just click on the link, it will get you in without having to enter the password. If you go to the Zoom website and try to put in the meeting ID, then it will ask you for the password. So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck because it's one extra step, but that's what I'm gonna do. So I wanted to get through all of my meetings for this week, and then my project for Thursday is to take every meeting that I have set up moving forward and add a password to it. And then I will send out the new link that includes the password. So it's gonna be, a bit of a challenge for every single group that we have meeting, but there's no workaround. And the password is better than the waiting room. If you have experience at all with Zoom meetings and the waiting room, it means you can't join in. Like, I like to have this set up so that if it's 9:31 and I'm not on yet, everybody can still get together and begin chatting with each other. If there's a waiting room, then nobody else can get on until I sign on and individually allow every single person to join. So the password seems to be the lesser of the evils.
So it's also, there is a legitimate safety concern that Zoom is reacting to, that there's some security issues and flaws.
I read about it.
And so I think it's inconvenient, but worth it.
Yeah, well, you know, I really think, Owen, that I am.
You got to keep it kosher. The federal government's listening.
I'm personally very influenced by my experience in the Army and, you know, flying into combat zones where people were actively trying to kill me. It's made me a little less fearful, I think. You know, I know the Zoom concern is what they call Zoom bombing. So there have been issues with Jewish groups that have had white power infiltration and disruption of Jewish meetings and services with extreme anti-Semitic actors. And I know in the Jewish community that's a big concern that people have. You know, I tend to be a little less fearful of that. I'd rather take that risk and not have the inconvenience. And to me, the greater risk is people not being able to participate in something because they can't manage the technology. So that's more of a concern to me personally. But I don't have that opportunity on Zoom now. So anyway, stand by for a new link that will include a password moving forward.
I don't think they could survive this group if they got in.
Well, you know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you just hit, God forbid, if you hit end.
Oh yeah, no, I get it. I do get it, but
and that's it. But you know, I guess there's concern that it would be traumatic for people if that occurred. So, which, you know, I'm sure it would be upsetting and disruptive. Anyway, going back to our hair conversation, it's all about right now the risk-benefit analysis, right? So,
right.
What's the risk-benefit analysis?
We do what we got to do.
Yes.
Changing subjects to BeliefNet. I see I have another liberal. I noticed that there's another liberal Quaker in the group.
Well, I'm a liberal Quaker.
So am I.
I'm a secular Jew, but that's
I
okay.
think I'm the only pagan.
I like how mine came up, said I was a Reformed Jew.
Yeah, I saw
Reformed.
that.
I'm like, what did I reformed from?
All right.
Such a thing as a conservative Quaker?
I don't know. All I know is I got liberal Quaker.
That's a good question.
I don't know.
All right. So we did, I believe, finish reading verses of chapter 26 last time. So we're about to enter chapter 27, but I wanted to look at Nechama Leibovitz's commentary on chapter, this last verses of chapter 26. And I believe a number of people were able to acquire the text and print it out. So is there someone who would volunteer to begin reading there on page 291?
I will.
Okay.
In this Sidra, it would seem from the context of the blessings and the curses that they were in some way connected with the precepts of the Jubilee and the sabbatical year, which are mentioned in the previous chapter. But the general nature of the phrases which introduce the blessings and the curses indicate that the chapter constitutes the finale to the whole book of Leviticus and to the laws of holiness contained therein. The concluding verse supports this thesis. These are the statutes, ordinances, and laws which the Lord made between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses.
So we can very readily see where she's coming from. That's a concluding summary, major statement. This is bringing to a conclusion the whole discussion of the book of Leviticus.
Shall I go on?
Please.
We shall deal with one passage in this chapter of reproof. The retribution that will overtake Israel for its sins moves towards a climax. The fifth catastrophe that Israel was threatened with in verse 27, quote, "If ye will not for all this hearken unto me," unquote, was the complete loss of its state, the destruction of the temple, and the dispersion of the people. And I will bring, this is the quote, the verse. And I will bring unto, excuse me, my papers are all over the place here. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies that dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And you will I scatter among the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you. And your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste. And I will make your cities a waste, and will bring your sanctuaries unto desolation, and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. To the last verse we quoted, one of our commentators adds, after the divine presence forsakes the whole of the land of Israel, the latter loses its radiance, and through this, the cities of Israel become desolate. After the destruction of its cities and the temple, the land which was once flowing with milk and honey was destined to become a desert. The exact meaning of the phrase that the enemies of Israel shall be astonished at it in verse 32 has been the subject of discussion among our commentators. The land will be, do you want me to go on?
Please.
The land will be so desolate that even its enemies who dwell therein will be astonished, the opposite of, quote, the joy of all earth, unquote. The allusion is to Lamentations 2:15, quote, all that pass by clap their hand at thee. They hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem. Is this the city that men called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? Unquote. That was from Ibn Ezra.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting discussion about how our enemies will view our destruction. That will they take joy in the destruction of Israel, or will the destruction be so profound that even our enemies who in theory desire that destruction will be dismayed by the extent of it? So that was from Ibn Ezra. And then there's a second commentator she's going to quote here called the Biur. Does somebody else want to pick up reading there? When you will be exiled from the land?
I will.
Thanks.
When you will be exiled from the land, it will not remain in its original condition of well-being. But just as it was blessed when you dwelt therein, so will I now make it desolate, until it will be the reproach of all countries. Its enemies will be astonished to find it in it a lack of everything, all kinds of disease and plague. This is to make known that its desolation was caused by your iniquities, as it is stated in Deuteronomy and the nations shall say, wherefore hath the Lord done this, done thus unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? And then men shall say, because they forsook the covenant of the Lord.
So it's interesting. The idea is it's not that we'll be exiled from the land and the land will still be the joy of all the earth, the beauty, the joy, the perfection of beauty. It will be so decimated that it will be evident that this was the hand of God doing this, and there's really no point for enemies to vanquish the land if they can't then take it over and enjoy the beauty, the perfection of the land. It will be no good to anyone. And that is presumably the evidence that this was divine intervention. It wasn't natural causes or just a historical process. Yes, Sharon.
This may be way off base, but I feel like it's very timely.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about Israel, it's about the United States of America.
Yes, I know. A lack of everything, all kinds of disease and plague.
Mm-hmm.
We talked last week, Sharon, you were not here, but we talked last week about the burden on the land itself and how timely that felt as well with the threat to the ecology, the environment based on human behavior. Terry, you were going to say?
I was going to say there's an implication in here, though, that's a little bit self-aggrandizing.
Oh, yes.
On the part of the Jews, that while the Jews live there, the land will be wonderful if there are observant Jews in the land, but as long as they're not observant Jews in the land, it can't be anything.
Yeah, I mean, very much history is revolving around everything is seen through that lens of our behavior.
So what?
If the Jews can't have it.
Wait. Let's have Barry and then Sherry.
I also see an echo of scorched earth policy, which particularly the Russians did in World War II. When they retreated, there was nothing for the Germans to have.
Yeah, that's a very apt reference. Yeah.
Yeah, I building on what Barry's saying, because I was thinking the same thing. So we're saying that not only are the people going to suffer who were there, the Israelites, but the land itself will be dead. And
right,
why punish the land too?
There'll be nothing left to return to. So people may be dispersed. We're sent wherever we're going to be sent, but the urge to return home, there's no home. It means that we're really done.
And if I can't have it, no one else can have it either.
Yeah, that's I find that very troubling.
But haven't the people been destroying the earth themselves even before this?
Part of the punishment, Sharon, is for not observing the sabbatical and the Jubilee year, which are supposed to be the rest for the land. And so now if you will not let the land rest, that rest is going to be enforced.
So it's not, I'm going to take away your dolls and give them to someone who deserves them.
Right.
It's I'm going to take away your dolls and I'm going to burn them, and no one can use them.
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of like that parenting image.
Yeah.
There's also the fact that God is making a statement to all of the non-Israelites. Let me tell you just how powerful I am. You don't want to mess with me. So I think there's a little PR going on for God.
That's been going on since the plagues. Why didn't God just let lead the Israelites out of Egypt initially? Why the need for the plague? And the Torah specifically stated this was to enhance God's reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Let the whole world know the power of this God.
What's interesting is that while I may not believe in the power of God to be personally involved in these things, there is a power, as we're seeing today, in group thought. There is a tremendous amount of power in a movement of people. So an inspired people, inspired by whatever, can accomplish amazing things.
That's very Quaker.
It must be very Quaker. I'm a Quaker.
That's why I said it. 'Cause I was at a Quaker wedding, and that's very Quaker, that the group does what it's going to do. Not,
Really?
yeah.
See, that's my problem. I'm a Quaker.
All right, so we've seen two positions that are similar. Now she's going to bring us to Rashi, who has a slightly different interpretation. So can somebody pick up there with page 293, Rashi?
I want to see Stan do it because I'm watching him read sideways, and it's
Okay.
That's just mean.
By the divine use of the first person.
Wait.
Where are you?
Yeah, we're on the,
293. You want me to start?
up.
Oh, Rashi, however, takes a
yes,
different view.
yeah, please.
This is a favorable message for Israel, implying that their enemies would find no ease in their land, which would be desolate before its inhabitants.
So, that just feeds that kind of nastiness and self-aggrandizement that, well, we can comfort ourselves in, exactly as I said previously, if we can't have it, no one can have it.
What prompted, I turned my computer sideways, what prompted Rashi to interpret the passage in a favorable sense, especially when the whole context is one of divine retribution on Israel. Here is one explanation of Rashi offered by one of his classic expounders. Rashi is prompted by the divine use of the first person in the phrases. And I will bring the land into desolation. I myself, the Almighty, is full of loving kindness, and the implication is that when the Holy One, blessed be he himself, performs kindness. Was that Maharai?
The Maharal is the
Maharal, okay.
So again, back to the parenting image, Terry. I only do this because I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
I'm punishing you. So he's interpreting because of the first person reference that God says, I'm going to do this. That means that it's done out of love. And if it's done out of love, then there must be some benefit to Israel in it. And the benefit is that, well, we can take comfort in the fact that if we're kicked out of the land, that nobody else will have access to enjoy it either. So I'm gonna, yeah, go ahead.
But the implication is not that they should feel any kind of satisfaction in the fact that no one else could have the land. It's to get them to turn around and change their behavior and stick to the plan.
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's both.
It's like a parent telling a child, I'm doing this for your own good.
Right, exactly. And I'm doing this because I love you.
Exactly.
And
And you'll learn from it.
I love you because if you don't love the child, then you don't even care enough to reprimand or guide or discipline them. There's no relationship, there's no caring connection. So why even be bothered? It's not, if you have had children and you have had to discipline them, that it's not fun for the person who's providing the discipline either. That's not a fun thing. It's a lot more fun and easier to say yes than to say no to a kid. I'll never forget when, I had only one grandchild, Helena, and she was little, and Jessie said to me, you can say no to her. I just looked at her in
And what did you say?
I said, like, no, that's your job. I'm
I'm trying to tell my daughter.
I'm all about, yes.
I
Come
have
on.
a friend.
All right.
So is there an implication that God is essentially saying, this is hurting me more than it hurts you?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh God, every one of these is killing me.
We have that image. I think it's in one of the prophets. I want to say Jeremiah of God crying that the Shekhinah, God's presence, goes into exile with the people and is crying along with the people. Absolutely. So Sherry put a comment in the chat, which I don't think everyone can see. She says, I continue to have great difficulty with the image of a retributive God. Perhaps a discussion for another time, but why not now? Do you want to say more about that, Sherry?
As we've been going through the curses, there's we talk about a loving God. We talk about the emotions we want to share with the world, tikkun olam and stuff. And yet, so much of what we've been reading, at least here, has been, I got the power and I'm going to really get you. And it seems antithetical to me.
I'm going to get you. I think what the Maharal is exactly addressing that point that you're making, Sherry, and saying that it feels punitive, or in your word, retributive, but it's really coming from a place of love. I'm going to get you. But what was the very first word of this parsha? Im b'chukotai telechu. If you walk in my ways. So that little word im is, I think, the powerful word that leads us into the whole chapter. If this is not, coming from a sense of anger and hostility, it's if you don't do the right thing, there are consequences. And that is a loving gesture to establish the world in such a way that good is rewarded and evil is punished. And so interesting, because right after this this class that we're having today, where's that piece of paper on my desk? I'm going to be doing the parak of the week. I'm doing the Pirkei Avot, and I'll have to find it obviously before the when we're done here. But the parak of the week from Pirkei Avot is chapter 1, number 3 in Pirkei. Oh, it's buried in paper on my desk. Anyway, but precisely addressing this point. So Pirkei Avot is gonna tell us, don't be like masters who like servants who serve the master in order to get a reward. Be like servants who serve the master for its own sake. So there's definitely also, I think, Sherry, an evolution that you're dealing here with the generation of the slaves, people who are used to being told, do what I tell you or you're going to be punished. And that's their psychology. And, you have to meet people where they are. And Pirkei Avot, which is, 1,000 years later, historically, then tries to guide us into a place of, let's say, do the right thing for its own sake, not because
a higher
of
level.
A higher level. Becca, you're raising your hand.
Yes, if we take out the emotional attributions, God is loving and kind and all of that, let us remember that this is a contract. And this is one party in the contract reminding the other party in the contract that we have certain, I can't think of the legal terms. There are certain agreements, elements to the
terms and conditions.
Thank you, counselor. There are terms and conditions, and I'm glad you think of me as warm and fuzzy. But you know what? I'm God, and I actually wrote the bigger part of the contract. And let me remind you what these terms and conditions are.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, what is the
What about
mutuality?
just
of the contract?
be good for goodness sake.
Right. But they're not in a position where they can hear that right at this moment historically. That's what I'm suggesting.
You know, with a contract, your people are in kind of equal. There's a mutuality, but I mean, God is here and people are down. It's not really a contract. It's sort of a contract of adhesion.
Yes.
I better do what the contract. I better sign the contract or else. It's not.
Yeah, this was not a negotiated contract.
It's not really.
You know?
No.
So it's kind of a prenup.
Well,
If you want to
Okay.
get into this relationship, these are the terms.
yeah, but the parties aren't of equal power or stature, so it's a problem. But
Yes, but also
nonetheless,
it appears
that's why
to
it's a
be
problem.
it appears to be irrevocable.
Yeah,
And that's
All right, so I'm going to go back to Nahum.
Felix has his hand up.
Oh, okay, darling, please.
So does David. David, did you have your hand up before me?
Who?
All right, thank you, David. Strengthening the perspective that this is coming from love, that Hashem is coming from love, for me is the constant reminders of everything that Hashem has done for us. He took us out of Egypt. He gave us a beautiful land. And for me, it's like saying, if all these things are not enough, there's more that I can still do to help you. It's not going to be good, but if all these positive things don't work, maybe something negative would work.
Right. I sustained you for 40 years in the wilderness, and I brought you into the land, and your clothes didn't wear out for 40 years, and you were.
I brought you manna from heaven.
Exactly.
I didn't let you starve.
Your hair didn't grow long.
The Midrash says that, where did the people get clothing from for 40 years? That the clothing miraculously didn't wear out and grew with them.
Yeah.
They only had manna to eat. I don't think they were eating that much to have to grow.
Yeah, right. David.
Again, sometimes I think you have to have irrational thinking to think about this. And this does not work for me at all, because we are, quote unquote, Jews, theoretically descendants from the people we're reading. But all this destruction that the God's going to promise if we're not following it has made us who we are, not these books per se or these stories. The destruction of the first temple allowed the development of the Torah. There was no Torah before that. The destruction of the second temple allowed Yochanan ben Zakkai to radically redesign Jewish belief. With his death
and practice.
With his death, it radically changed again through the advent of Judah HaLevi. And by the way, Israel was still a prosperous country during his time period, which is another 400 to 500 years, which slipped into the Babylon, which became the center of the Jewish world. Jewish world, not the Israelite world, the Jewish world, which then slipped into commentators like Ibn Ezra, Rashi, the next 1100s, 1200s. That's another part of the Jewish world that we are all heritage to, not the Israelite world. So
are you suggesting then that the destruction is an essential part of fueling the growth and evolution?
It's fueled a evolution, but there are times that people are trying to go back to the way it was, and Judaism has kept changing and evolving. The Judaism of today, that whether you're a Quaker or a Mennonite Jew or whatever, we are heritage to a culture is vastly different. They would have no concept of that time period. And us reading into what they're thinking is sometimes a little hard because they think
Magical?
completely different.
Yeah, magical thinking.
Right, which projected back our values.
Yes. So when we read that the land has been destroyed, perhaps it wasn't as destroyed as we imagine it has been. And it limped along in its own way for many hundreds and hundreds of years without a central government. But we have a Jewish cultural government, if you will, that, or belief system, or operating system. I don't know quite
It
how.
also, sorry, it also reflects the authors of this part of the text. That
Yeah.
what you just outlined is changes in thought from Israelite days to in the land to Roman Empire, et cetera. That the idea that Jewish thought has changed, and this version of the Torah, as you pointed out, wasn't the Torah that this version was not what everybody brought into the land of Canaan. It was oral, and it changed over time. When they started writing it, who started writing it? It was their own perception, either of what they had learned or what they think should happen next. And that takes on the authority of this is what was always true. And so I think that the evolution happens faster than the written history of at least Jewish thought has occurred.
You know, it occurs to me that it would be so much easier if we were just literalists.
Well,
what do you mean?
I don't like beer that much.
Are you saying that figuratively?
Yes.
all right, Lisa Kaiser, and then I want to get back to Nechama Leibovitz. Oh, and Becca, you raising your hand again?
No, nope, that was it.
I don't know. I think it's all about the tension of Torah. I guess it's, for me anyway, it's important to know how it all began, where it all came from, the context in which it was written. But the tension comes in where, that Torah is dynamic and Torah is living, and it's important that we bring our own insight to it as well. So it's that ongoing tension of how it came to be, but yet what it continues to mean.
Right, look at how relevant we've found much of it to be to today's world as well. So understanding it both in context and also if it's completely inapplicable to us today, then historians may enjoy studying it, but it's less applicable for the rest of us. All right, I'm going to continue in Nechama here. So remember, we just read the Bible saying that this was an act of love. I discipline you because I love you. Though the immediate action described is one of destruction, the fact that its author is God is sufficient guarantee of its positive and ultimately reconstructive purpose. Nachmanides characteristically elaborates on Rashi's brief comment. The phrase, "and your enemies shall be astonished at it," bears a favorable message for every Jewish community in exile. Our land, it states, will not receive our enemies. It is a promise and proof that this land, which is naturally goodly and spacious, and which was always inhabited, will remain desolate. Since we left it, no nation nor tongue has been able to take it over. All of them have tried to settle it, but have never succeeded. So that's to Terry's point, I'm taking away your doll and nobody else can have it. We may detect in Nachmanides' words the fruits of his own firsthand impressions of the Holy Land. When he arrived in Jerusalem, he witnessed the land in its desolation and derived therefrom a message of comfort and consolation. He saw the land awaiting the redemptive hand of its own people. His feelings were shared 700 years later by the forerunners of the lovers of Zion. The next verse, 33, is similarly seen in an ambivalent light. Its plain sense is even more ominous than the previous. And you will I scatter among the nations. Some commentators, like Rashi, regarded it as a message of retribution, of darkness, and not of light. And here's the Rashi. The passage is dire in its content. When the citizens of one country are exiled, they are sent to the same distant spot. They are able to comfort each other with their presence. Whereas Israel is scattered like chaff with the winnowing fan, with no one particle coming in contact with the other. So that's kind of a really interesting thought, that being scattered among the nations is worse than at least we're all going to exile to some other location. You can rebuild some kind of a sense of a community in that location. But when you're scattered to the four corners, yeah, whose doggy is that? So when you're scattered to the four corners, then you're really forlorn. You're really that's the what I call the diaspora of the diaspora. Now, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about how when you're someplace cut off from a Jewish community and you meet another Jewish person, or let's just take it out of the Jewish context. You're traveling the world somewhere and you meet somebody else from Phoenix. All of a sudden, absolutely nothing with that person, and yet there's a sense of a connection just by having that commonality. So I think that's what we're talking about here. And Nachmanides, writing, around the same time as Maimonides, as Rambam, which is like 12th century, and Nechama Leibovitz, who you have to remember is Israeli. She's living in the rebuilt state of Israel. And so she, I think, is reading Nachmanides from the perspective of an Israeli who says that there was no real country in the land of Israel with all the parameters of governance that we would associate with a country from the time that Nachmanides is writing this until the establishment of the state of Israel. So she's reading this, I would say, from very much of a Zionist perspective when she says his feelings were shared 700 years later. So that's who she's talking about. She's talking about her generation, which is reestablishing Jewish governance in the land of Israel. So I think that's important.
Can I jump in on this, Rabbi?
Yes.
The Becca premise of all this is that we're building a community. We're finding ways to bind people together. This is therefore the ultimate threat. This is saying all this effort, all this work to make you a group bound together by these laws, by these beliefs, by your choosing to believe and follow Hashem, that to say, I will scatter you, is to say, I will disrupt any effort, all this work you've put into it. You will not be a community. And implied in that is, how would you ever be able to rebuild that again if I've torn asunder all your efforts?
Although, going back to Nechama, there is that tension between the rebuke and also the comfort. So others, however, regard this passage as containing a message of comfort. This is from the Talmud. So this is, again, that the Roman era people were talking about earlier. There was a certain ruler who hated the Jews. He asked his advisors the following question: what should a man do who suffers from a wart on his foot? Should he cut it off and live in comfort, or leave it and suffer? They answered, cut it off and live in comfort. Then Katia Bar Shalom said, in the first place, you cannot do away with all of them, for it is written, for I have spread you abroad to the four winds of heaven. Nachmanides makes a similar comment on Jacob's preparation to meet Esau. Jacob had prepared 2 separate camps, and he said, if Esau comes to the first camp and smite it, then the camp which is left shall escape. This means that Jacob knew that his descendants would not completely fall into the hands of Esau, Esau there being symbolic of the enemies of Israel. 1 camp at least would be saved. We have here an allusion to the fact that the Almighty will not decree our total destruction by Esau, but would inflict on some of us in some countries. 1 king would declare our lives and money forfeit, whilst another would show compassion and take in the refugees. So the comfort of exile and dispersion is that it's a hedge against the total destruction of the people. Because if one wart is cut off, the other warts use a negative image, but the ideas, we may lose part of the community, but others will survive. And hence, I believe, the title of this chapter, Hope Despite Holocaust. So she's writing here, the translator's foreword of the book says that Nechama Leibovitz was writing these commentaries between 1955 and 1962. So this book that we have these collected in a book, but they were like a weekly column that she did between 1955 and 1962. So the Holocaust was even more to the forefront of her thinking. Here she is in the reborn, rebuilt state of Israel immediately post-Holocaust. And you can imagine how meaningful this idea is, that even though we've lost this humongous part of our community, yet the Jewish people will go on to survive and to rebuild. I'm going to continue on 295 unless anybody wants to jump in there. Oh, let me also note that it's just about 11 o'clock. We have about a page and a quarter. I would like to read through the last page and a quarter and see if there are final comments, and that way we can pick up next week with a new chapter, Leviticus 27. If anybody has another commitment, because we were supposed to end at 11, we totally understand.
Yes, we all have such busy calendars.
Yeah, well, people have other things going on in their lives. They have to be respectful of time. I mean,
that cackle was perfect.
I'm the child of Sandy Coppell could easily have another Zoom or phone call that she's scheduled for.
There we go.
Or she's meeting somebody at the house. She's trying to sell her house and sell her stuff. So anyway, let me just finish up here. So we're at the top of 295. Rashi again detects the light behind the darkness in yet another verse in this chapter of curses. And I shall bring them into the land of their enemies. I myself shall bring them. This is a message of comfort for Israel, that they should not say, since we are exiled among the heathens, let us act like them. I shall not let them, but I will send them my prophets and bring them back under the wings of the divine presence, as it is stated. That which cometh into your mind shall not be at all. In that ye say, we shall be as the nations, as the families of the countries, to serve wood and stone. As I live, saith the Lord God, surely with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with fury poured out will I be king over you. So in other words, you're going to be exiled, but God is still going to be with you. You're still Jews. You still have the path of the of the mitzvot. One of Rashi's commentators takes issue with him. I do not understand why Rashi does not explain the passage in its literal sense, that God would bring them into the land of their enemies, as in another passage, the Lord will bring thee unto a nation that thou hast not known. But in another of Rashi's commentators justifies his explanation. The text should not have used an expression of bringing. Bringing has a positive connotation, implying providing for the object of the bringing. Since the exile constituted a forsaking of the people, the expression of bringing, which implies care and concern for them, is here out of place. So I'm not sure if the Maharal is reacting there to bringing in Rashi or in the text itself. Let me look in the Torah itself. I think he's talking about Rashi. Well, that's the translation of verse 41. Let's see. The Hevetio dam be'eretz oivechem. So the Maharal is actually taking issue with the language in the Torah itself, that the Torah uses the language attributed to God of "I will bring them," which he says is a positive image, rather than "I will banish them," which would be a more graphic and accurate description. Yes, Terry Berman.
But the bringing is a critical piece here, because as you were reading Nehemiah, and especially in light of the Holocaust and other Holocausts that have existed, the scattering has been the survival.
Yes.
The scattering has allowed for not everybody, as that passage clearly states, for one king to be a shithead and another king to be a really nice guy.
Right.
So we're not accepted every place, but the fact that we're scattered allows for the organism of Judaism to survive.
Yes, and it's a major argument that American Jews use as our apologetic for why we're not all making Aliyah. That we support the land of Israel more by staying in America, guaranteeing that, God forbid, something happened to Israel.
If we all lived in one place, one good bomb could take the whole thing out.
That's it. That's all it would take.
And the secondary apologetic is that we are able to lobby America and work as hard as we can to ensure that the United States stays a strong ally of Israel.
And the same thing is happening in Europe, in European countries, Western Europe anyway.
Right. All right, let's just read the end here. So the language of the text itself provides us with a hint of its positive message of comfort and hope. God will bring, italics, his people into the land of their enemies. It's interesting, this is a translation. So it's clearly the translator who added the italics, because there's no such thing as italics in Hebrew.
Yeah.
God will bring his people into the land of their enemies. He will not send them or have them brought, but will accompany them himself in all of their wanderings. So that's that idea of the Shekhinah going into exile with us. The outward message of these verses is one of retribution and catastrophe, but inwardly can be detected overtones of comfort and consolation. That's her major thesis in the chapter. The chapter of curses and reproof itself ends on an outward note of hope, making it unnecessary for us to look for clues between the lines. So she concludes then with the words of the conclusion of the whole chapter, which reinforce her thesis. And yet, for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, neither will I abhor them to destroy them utterly and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord, their God. So going back to that covenant, the contract, the relationship endures even in exile. So there you have it. And can I just say, I hope we're taking a moment to appreciate the brilliance of this woman and how she brings, commentaries over literally 1,000 years to bear into her thinking and analysis of the Torah text itself. I mean, she makes this dance among all of these commentaries look so seamless and so easy that I just want to take a moment and say, like, what a brilliant, brilliant commentary this is that Nehemiah Leibowitz has provided us with. And you know, I direct you to the text, to her thinking when I think that there's something especially profound that we should read. But you should know that there's a volume like this for each book of the Torah, and I can't remember if it's Genesis or Exodus or both of them, where it's actually 2 volumes, and she's got half a dozen commentaries on every single parsha. So if you're looking to expand your library, you might want to take a look, and then you can read half a dozen or more of the, you know, these same kind of incredibly thought-provoking commentaries on each of the parshiot.
Excellent.
So with that, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Yah Aseh Shalom, Aleinu
Aleinu,
Amen.